Hey, what's good, everybody? Peek out here in Singapore, chilling as always. It's about 10:45 in the morning, Friday, finally. Not that that means anything to me because I hustle no matter what. It doesn't matter what day it is. It's Monday to Monday for me. But yeah, Friday finally, which means I get my baby girl home with me for the weekend. That's why I look forward to the weekend. So just to be clear, right? Been a pretty good week. I feel like I was a lot more productive this week than I have been for most of July already. But that isn't to say that I'm not always trying to consume as much as possible. That means that, whether I'm watching, yes, I do watch Netflix, whether I'm watching Netflix or I'm talking to my coach and colleagues, group members, family members, temple members, like anybody, whoever I'm talking to, I've still got my ears open listening for, ideas and beliefs and stuff so that I can understand better. I do a lot of observing on purpose because I feel like if I don't know the atmosphere that I'm in, I run the risk of not relating to them very well. I'll be over here in one corner thinking some kind of thing, and then they're on a different level, and there's no way that I can relate to to the people around me. So I try really hard to listen and relate and pay attention to the things that they find important and the things that they use as part of the parameters within which they operate. So that's why I actually named this beliefs and systems, because I feel like that's basically what our whole lives are made up of. It's almost like anytime you sit down to play a board game, the first thing you do is go through the rules, right? What are the rules? Like, let's say Uno. You know that you get a certain amount of cards dealt to you and you have to operate within those cards itself. And if you don't have a card that matches the color or the number, then you have to pick up a card and you have to take turns or whatever. So once you know the rules, you know what you can and can't do, basically. And it's kind of the same thing in your own life, whether you realize it or not. You are brought up with certain beliefs. So as you grow up in your household, your house culture is such that, maybe your mom says, as soon as you come in the house, you have to wash your feet, and then you can go into whatever room of your house you want to. That's something that my grandmother used to tell us, right? You take your shoes off at the door, you keep your shoes close to the door or outside the house, and you come in and you wash your feet, and then you can go on about your business in the house itself. As soon as you wake up in the morning, you have to do this, this, and this in order, and then you can go on about your business. And that becomes part of your operating criteria, kind of. It's like the way you've programmed your life according to these rules that you had to live within. And that's where your beliefs come from, and then the systems that you run your life with are based on those beliefs. And I think that's really important to identify, because then you have like a starting place. And a lot of times you can't tell where it comes from or what made you start believing these things in the first place. But that's where a third party like me can actually help you kind of ask those questions, and then you can figure it out. But I want to talk about this because one of my colleagues brought up depression yesterday. And for the most part, it's not what you would expect. You've been told thousands of times, and in movies and, news reports, depressive people are shut-ins. They don't take care of themselves. They don't wash, they don't clean, they look very scruffy and unkempt. They look very upset all the time. They don't come out and socialize ever. And that's what depression looks like. But that's not the case. Actually, a lot of normal functioning adults that you would never have guessed are depressed because they don't speak aloud about the things that bother them. They will come to work every day without fail because they have to. They will smile and, make small conversation and go about their day. But in the back of their mind, there are these thoughts that are running constantly about how unhappy they are and how they feel stuck and they don't like where they are. They're not comfortable. They don't know what to do about it. They feel like they have no other choices. This is just the way life is. This is my life right now and I've got to deal with it, kind of thing. So a lot of people don't realize that depression has many faces. You can't tell just by looking at someone if they are or aren't depressed. You can't tell just by looking at someone if they are or aren't addicted to something. You can't tell just by looking at someone if they have a bad temper or not. You can't tell unless that situation presents itself where they either have no choice but to act out or are triggered somehow, and then they just kind of react. So you don't know what people are going through. And that's why I'm here to make sure that we contemplate some of those things. We take into consideration some of those things. That's why I wanted to talk about beliefs and systems. So for me, right, a lot of my life, I was operating within the parameters of, I'm a Hindu female. I come from an old school Tamil family. We have very, very high expectations of our children. We are classically trained, so we're trained in the arts as well as, regular college degrees, all of that. Lots of engineers and doctors and high functioning degrees, basically, right? So we need the high functioning degree with the big job so that we can make a lot of money and basically provide for our families. But along with that comes like a dress code. For the longest time, I was not allowed to wear shorts. And even when I found that I had the freedom to do so, I think I started wearing shorts in college, I was embarrassed and felt funny about it because I was not comfortable with it yet. It was something that I had to kind of push the boundaries on because my own confidence was not built on the fact that I was used to showing my legs. My legs look different from everybody else's. I used to be made fun of. People used to talk about I had chicken legs, stuff like that. But it was one of those things that I built my life around. So I didn't buy shorts. I actually didn't wear short skirts either. I usually wore like long hippie looking, flared skirts, stuff like that. So these beliefs that maybe someone in passing said or maybe you're raised with become foundational for how you live your life, and people don't realize that. So when I talk about people with depression and people dealing with difficulties in their world, a lot of it comes down to what were you told, what do you believe, and then how have you integrated that into the way you live your life? A lot of that stuff, maybe it helped to keep you safe as a young child, but as an adult, it's no longer valid. This is why I talk about, updating your belief systems, updating and improving the way you do things, because maybe it fit at one point, but it no longer fits. And that's the point, right? We're continually expected to evolve and grow and learn new things. Obviously, for me, it was culture shock because everywhere I went up until I got to the US, we lived with family members. So every family I came across had the same value systems as mine. So there was no getting worried about, oh my gosh, do they hit us too much, or do they yell too much, or is that abuse or is it not abuse? It was normal. It was normal because everyone in my family had the same situation. They all lived the same way. They all grew up the same way. So yeah, we had canes and we got yelled at, we got punished because we were naughty. We were kids. We were meant to be naughty. But it wasn't until I moved to the West, like the US, and went to school where the diversity wasn't as varied as it was in the other countries. Because let's think about this, right? Singapore, predominantly Chinese, Malay, Indian. So lots of culture. London, lots of Indian culture. You get to Australia, you do have it's a little more Caucasian, but you do have Aboriginals and you do have a couple of Asians because a lot of Asians settled in Australia. Indonesia, absolutely. Lots of Asian culture, mixed Malay, Indian, and very few Caucasians. But then when you get to the US, you have Caucasian, you have African American, and that's it. You don't have very many Indian people around unless you move to like the bigger cities where it's metropolitan, right? So it was super culture shock when I got to the US and went to a private school at that, because the private school did happen to be formerly a white only school. But it was privatized and I was very excited to be there. It was new. But even then, because those kids had grown up in that environment, they had their own culture. They'd been there forever already, even before it was privatized. So I came into a new situation for me, but they had already been there a couple of years. So it was, trying to break in and fit in and get along with everybody. But what I found was their idea of how to raise children directly contradicted everything I knew at the time. And I had a really difficult time managing East meets West when it came to parenting as a teenager. So that was the cause of a lot of fights I had with my mom. As it is, moms and daughters fight. That's what we do. You tell me I can't do it, I'm gonna tell you you're really okay. I'll do it when you're not around. But the point being that suddenly I had to deal with how a family dynamic is in the West versus how it is in the East. It's very strict. It's very structured. You can and cannot do this. It's very black and white. Whereas the specific families that I encountered, they were a little more, I'm not going to say modern, they were a little more open-minded. We lived in an ashram, so they were exposed to a little bit of Hindu, Asian culture anyway, but they were very, how do I put this? I guess you could say the word hippie. When you think free love and free thinking and very open communication within a family dynamic, there is respect. Not as it's not hinging on the respect part, but there is respect. But you get to speak your mind a little bit more. It was a little more forgiving in the families that I encountered while I was living in Yogaville. So it became one of those things where I started comparing my family to theirs, where at one point I thought my family was perfect because all the other families were just like mine, and I understood what the rules were and I knew what to do and what to expect. And if I did this, I knew I was going to get in trouble. And it wasn't going to be just getting in trouble with my parents. It's going to be my mom's going to tell my aunt, I'm going to get in trouble with her, and she's going to tell my uncle, and I'm going to get in trouble with him. And it's going to be reinforced across the village that was raising me, right? But then I got to this place and I was learning that that's not the only way to raise kids, and it's not always the most effective depending on the child. And in a family, if you had like 3 children, all 3 children have completely different personalities and they have completely different needs and completely different love languages. And yeah, the dynamic between the oldest child and the mother will be different between the oldest child and the middle child, the oldest child and the youngest child, the oldest child and the parent. Like, all of those things will differ. So it became one of those things where I suddenly had a lot more to consider when it came to understanding what was right and what was not right. And even then, it took me a very long time to get to the point of there is no right or wrong. There is effective and ineffective, and there is hurtful and there is encouraging. And that took a lot for my mind to wrap around. When people say there's no good or bad, there just is, it's not to say that they're dismissing that there are some real evils in the world. It's almost like saying things happen, and this is, my umbrella story all over again, umbrella and rain story. Things happen, the rain happens, but it's the value assigned to the rain in that moment that makes it good or bad to you. Because I could be in the same rainstorm that you are, and if you have nowhere to go, you're splashing on the rain, it's fun, you're cool, you're enjoying it. But if I got to get to work and I'm afraid, I got to worry about where I'm walking so I don't fill my heels full of water and I don't slip and fall on the way there, it becomes a burden to walk through that rain. So it's not such a good thing for me, and it was a big paradigm shift for me. So that's why I realized that it was important for people to really look at what it is that they believe and how important it is to cling to that belief, or if it's okay that, you've gotten to a point in your life where it helped you get to where you are, and now it's time to look at it again and see if it's still effective and useful, and if need be, discard that belief and adopt a new one. Another thing that I went through, growing up in Hindu culture, we believe in reincarnation. There isn't really a heaven and hell, it's reincarnation. And there's karma, right? So retribution is in this lifetime, and if you make a mistake, chances are you're going to get punished for it somewhere along the line before you die. And if you don't pay off your karma, you come back again until you pay off the karma. Which also means that when you come back again, you don't know any better, you're probably going to rack up more karma, and it's just going to go on for a while. But it is when you reach that enlightened life where you are very aware of all things and you become the observer instead of participating in life. You observe and you understand the connectedness of all things, that you reach that level where you are able to purge all of your karma and you no longer come back. Your soul is free, basically. But then, coming into contact with the Christianity, I realized that people believe in heaven and hell. And they were very, very adamant about, you do this, this, and this, you're going to hell. If you don't do it this particular way, you're going to hell. And it was very scary to me. I remember the first time I ever sat in a church, and I wanted to. I asked for that experience because I wanted to know how people saw the world, what was different, what made them believe the things that they believe, how were they understanding what the rules were, where was it coming from, how was it explained. I wanted to know all those things because in Hindu tradition, your parents are supposed to explain it to you, teachers explain it to you, but then when you get to the temple, no one really explains much. There is no preacher, there is no sermon, there is no message for the day. You come, you walk around 5 times or whatever, like whatever your ritual is at the temple, you go, you meditate, you come back, finished. You pay the priest, you have like a puja done, which means, they show a fire lamp to the gods, and they maybe pour milk over the gods, and they maybe put flowers and fruit in front of the gods, and you're blessed, and you walk away, finished. You've paid for that blessing, basically. But in church, it's different. You actually are delivered a message. They try to uplift your spirits. They try to present information that will help you find hope. And that was encouraging to me. I enjoyed that part. But this whole heaven and hell thing had me worried for a little while, I'm not going to lie. And I was wondering, man, I was raised this way, but there are other ways to live as well. And what was it that fit best for me? And after a while, I started believing in heaven and hell. And not to say that I was going directly there or anything. I mean, sometimes I felt like it, but eventually I found other ways to understand and maybe adopt new beliefs. I started evolving the way that I thought about things, the way that I considered life in general. And it went from you either go to heaven or hell to maybe you spend a little bit of time in hell depending on the crimes you committed, kind of like going to jail for a period of time, and then everyone goes to heaven eventually. And that felt good for a little while. And then eventually I realized, for me, my belief became that maybe there isn't a place we go after we die. Maybe it's we're here on this plane in this material world, and we have a choice of making a heaven of our lives or a hell of it, depending on the way we think about the things that are happening. And that changed for me. So that became something else that I adopted. So I'm not saying that any of my beliefs are the one and only way to do it, because obviously I'm telling you that it evolved as I grew up. But I realized that with each of these beliefs, I adjusted the way that I was living my life. In Singapore, I've talked about this many times. In Singapore, the belief is the only way to provide for your family and make sure that all your bases are covered, as in the kids are well educated, there's food in the house is always clean, your kids are always taken care of. You don't need to depend on family members to help babysit your kids, whatever, is to have a maid. And for some people, that is the only way to live. It is a proper way to live. It is the way you give the best to your family. But I also believe that monkey see, monkey do, my kids are going to emulate everything that I do. And if I cannot show that I am capable of doing all the dirty work in the house, which means clean the toilet and wash butts and, do diapers and run all over creation trying to get from one tuition to a CCA to a function at the temple, back home, and get homework done. If I don't do that whole goose chase, right, they won't know that it's possible as well. They will grow up believing that they have to have a third party to help out, and I didn't want that. So going against the grain again, I adjusted my beliefs. Now, for a time, I did have a maid because I was told so many times that I could not operate without one. I was not to depend on my mom. It was not fair to her because she needs a break as well. And for a while, I believed that, okay, fine, you know what? Maybe I'm putting too much stress on my mother. She shouldn't have to look after my daughter. I should be able to function on my own. But eventually, it also just so happened that my maid had her own priorities in life. She was only here for a contract. She was only here for a specific time, and then she wanted to go home. She was sending her money home every month, and her loyalty was not to me, it was to her family. And even though she was under contract with me, and she had a pretty easy time of it because I was very inclusive, I made sure that she hung out with us, she ate with us, she slept when we slept, she had her own space. But it became one of those things where she put her needs above her own, which is what everyone does. They put their needs above their own, and it directly affected my daughter, which at that point I needed to put my priorities above everyone else's, and I had to send her back home earlier than expected. So all of this to say that we all have our set of beliefs. We all have our set of beliefs, and they're so ingrained in us sometimes that we've built the system of our lives around those beliefs. A lot of them started when we were kids. We were told to do this, this, and this in this particular order, and that's the only way that it can be done. I was always taught that I was to study with no music, no TV on. That was the only way to study, otherwise I would not absorb any of that information. But going to school and studying psychology, I realized I'm one of those people that needs ambient noise. I need something in the background to keep me awake, because reading, not my strong suit. I would rather discuss ideas with people so I can better understand them rather than read and highlight and make notes. That's the way I learn best. But for a long time, I did what I was told because I didn't know any better. And that was the belief that I had structured my life around. And eventually what I learned was I can learn just fine with music on in the background. Sometimes it's okay to have music with lyrics, and sometimes I just need, a score from some movie so that I have background noise. But it's those kinds of experiences that makes us question what we did know and adjust accordingly. The reason so many of us have a hard time matching what we want and what makes us happy to the reality of our lives is because we're not willing to drop the beliefs that negate what makes us happy. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to say it again. You ready? There are times in our lives where we realize that certain things make us happy. I love music. I love to dance. I love to be involved with people. I love to be around people. But I also know, because I've been told, that familiarity breeds contempt. I shouldn't be too chummy with so many people because I will lose all of my priorities. And in a way, yeah, okay, I believe that. But I also need that outlet because that's the personality that I have. So being self-aware and leading myself meant that I had to really sit down and think about what it is that made me happy. People don't teach this. People don't ask you those questions and actually expect a real answer. They don't ask you to contemplate these things and come up with a real answer. But trust me, if you know this about yourself, it becomes easier to adjust the systems in your life. I thought office hours were 9 to 5. 9 to 5, 9 to 5. That's the only way that it could be. And in Singapore, it's not 9 to 5, it's 9 to 6 plus. Then you bring it home and you have to answer phone calls. But it was hard for me to reconcile that idea because my daughter goes to school at 7:15 and comes back by 1:45 if I don't have her in daycare. So how do I have office hours as a small business and still pay attention to my daughter and not let her get lost in the shuffle? I had to adjust my beliefs. The minute that I realized that I could split my shift, because it's my business, I can do that. The minute I can split my shift, I felt a lot freer. I felt like, oh my God, the possibilities. I didn't feel so tied down and stuck in my beliefs anymore. I didn't feel like I had no choice anymore. I suddenly had a lot more choices. So what I did was, and you've heard this in a couple episodes before, I matched my office hours to when she was not available to me. Which means the minute I drop her off at 7:15, I'm going to give myself till 8 o'clock to get back home and start work. Which, I mean, I'll be back home by 7:25 anyway. It doesn't even take me 10 minutes to walk back from school. So 7:25 I get back home, which means I have time to go take a shower and have breakfast and set for a little bit and then start my work at 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock to 1:45. Okay, 1:30. Let's say 1:30 because I'm going to start walking down at 1:30 anyway. Let's see, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1:30. That's 5.5 hours of solid work that I can really get done if I focus. And focus meant that I need to know what works for me and what doesn't work for me. I can't just have a checklist. I can't just have a checklist. I need to have times associated with a checklist. Meaning to say that if I time the first task, I will make sure I get it done before I click it, check it, and then move on to the next one. Whereas if I don't time it, I know this because I've tried it for a while, I will start one, and when I get bored, I'll start another one, and when I get bored, I'll start another one, and pretty soon I've done 5 tasks, but they're all half done, and they're not done very well. And I'm distracted, and I'm scrolling through Facebook and Instagram, and not really getting much of anything done properly. So this is where I'm saying self-awareness means that I can really dig into what I believe about myself and adapt, adjust, accommodate accordingly the systems that I have for how I live my life. Knowing that 9 to 5 does not have to be my business hours. I am a small business owner. I can adjust it as I see fit. Which means splitting my day means that I can accommodate time zones across the world. Man, that changed my life a little bit, you know? So then it became that, if I really wanted to start at 7:30, I could. 7:30 to 1:30 meant 6 hours of solid work. I get my daughter at 1:45. We can come home, chill. We can go play outside. We can go for a walk. We can spend 5 hours doing homework if we really had to. But technically, let's say 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock, She's mine. I'm hers. We belong to each other. And nothing will come between that. And she gets solid time with me, which means our bond is very, very strong. And then at 8 o'clock when I put her to bed and read her a story, she goes to sleep and I go back to work, which is fine. I can function like that because the other thing I know is I need a solid 6 hours of sleep and I'm good to go. So back again, if I work from 8 until midnight, that's another 4 solid hours, which means total I worked about 10 hours in my business. I still get 6 hours of sleep, no problem. I actually get more like six and a half hours of sleep. And I can function again the next day. So just breaking the belief of what my business hours had to look like, what quality time with my daughter had to look like, where I was going to be able to squeeze all this time in because I need to put in work in my business, changed my life. And my happiness factor shot through the roof because I don't feel stuck. I feel like I'm getting all of my work done with less stress. With less stress. And that was the biggest thing. So I urge you all, take a look at your belief systems. Take a look at what you do. Maybe you work it backwards. Let's talk about what you do in your day. And then ask why you do it that specific way. And once you think about why you do it that specific way, you need to ask, okay, well, where did that idea come from that it has to be this way, that it can't be any other way? Because all of y'all know already. To get to 8, it could be 3 plus 5. It could be 4 plus 4. It could be 1 plus 7. But all of those answers are correct as long as it works for you. You don't have to be stuck. You don't have to be miserable. You don't have to be stressed out all the time. Take a look at what stresses you out and why. And I guarantee you'll find a better way to do things that will also allow you to enjoy your life instead of be a slave to it. I love you guys. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.